Excellent. Thanks again for having me on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about interacting with Wisconsin's insect pest text alert or insect pest network and alert system. And even though I have a lot of extension logos and a new Bick Lab logo that we created just for this set of resources, really this is a story about collaboration. It's a story about collaboration between DATCP, the Department of Ag, Trade, Consumer Protections, UW Extension, and the Bick Lab. So today we're talking a little bit about the DATCP trapping network. We're going to talk a little bit about the UW-Madison Extension's role in this system, of this incredible trapping network. And we'll talk about the pest alert system and the future. So unbeknownst to me before I showed up about 2 years ago, DATCP runs about 400 site system for monitoring insect pests. Now, they're not all in field and forage crop systems. They're not evenly spread out across the state. They're a little bit on the opportunistic side for those locations. And there's also a volunteer element. So for example, when you take black cutworms, whose adults just had the first flights a couple weeks ago, we have a network this year of 72 pheromone traps that are established in 26 counties. But really, this is a combination, this entire trapping network is a combination of pheromone traps that are insect pest specific. It's a combination of blacklight traps, which are not at all species specific, as well as monitoring and scouting for a whole range of additional pests. So when you go online and you take a look at that DATCP trapping network, you can find a map that looks a little bit like this for last week. In fact, this exact one, where there's a weekly number, it's a point estimate of all of the places that we can actually have these traps. Those are in gray. In green are those light insect count numbers. In yellow are more extreme insect count numbers. And in this case, red, which this week, or as of May 2nd, we started having a couple more black cutworm flights. We have an actual increase or pretty high numbers of moths counted and collected in these pheromone traps. Now, just because the moths are flying doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad year or a good year. A couple other pieces have to come in to actually understand the pest dynamics of this system. So, for instance, when pests come into the system, first thing we need to know is, are they there in high enough abundances? Second piece, did weather interrupt their mating? Third piece is, did the timing of when they flew into the system actually coincide with when the crop is available for them to start laying eggs, and for those eggs to, in this case, cutworms to become larvae, which then cut the bottom of a whole range of crops. So this network piece is really monitoring, at least for pheromones, just the adult moths, which should give an indication of severity of pests across the system. And when you actually look online, you can see on DATCP site, you can actually see by county, by location, and by week into the year, exactly where these moths are found. So not only do we get this really cool map of where we're collecting moths, but we can actually get a county by county breakdown of these moths. And when you take a step back, instead of looking at black cutworm, which is of extreme interest to me, but you look at their entire pest survey system, and you can get to the pest survey through the DATCP pest survey link down over here, you can actually double click on pests of interest. So if you're an apple farmer, you can be looking at apple orchard pests. If you're looking at corn earworm, you can click corn earworm. Now, if you click that site, it actually goes to last year's counts right now, because corn earworm isn't economically relevant just yet, but it'll come on up later in the season. We can also look at blacklight pests and blacklight traps, of which there aren't as many as pheromone traps across the system: western bean cutworm, black cutworm, which I showed you, and true armyworm. And the really cool thing about this trapping network is it's not alone in the region. In fact, there are two really interesting resources that allow you to map out what's going on in the greater North Central or Midwestern region. The first one I'm going to highlight today is the IPM pipe. And this is the corn-specific IPM pipe, where it has this interactive dashboard. And this is actually from this year's numbers. It has this interactive dashboard of states and counties where we actually find those insects in traps. This is integrated with Iowa, it's integrated with Illinois, it's integrated with a couple other states around us. And it allows us to actually double click and say, okay, I'm interested in what's happening in Dodge County. And you get a more detailed number of pests in Dodge County. And it actually fits a line for how many flights we think we saw in this time frame. Now, this is pretty darn distinct from a modeling piece, where models use something called accumulated temperature to estimate when pests are going to be at the economically damaging stage. This is just a trapping piece, so it doesn't do any sort of forward predicting. There's a second one, Great Lakes and Maritime Pest Monitoring Network. Right now, it seems to be exclusively stuck on the 2023. I haven't been able to find the 2024 dashboard yet, but it does something really similar, where we can go through and actually check what's happening across the Great Lakes area. And you can zoom in a little bit, let's say zoom into Wisconsin, and a really nifty feature of this particular Great Lakes and Maritime Pest Monitoring Network area is you can actually press play and go forwards and backwards and watch as these dots increase in size. And the size of the dot is representative of the number of moths that were collected at each date. So you can start in April and play and watch it go all the way through September. So watch those pests immigrate into the system and watch them kind of not be a problem, not be a problem anymore, which is pretty nifty if you want a regional understanding of what's going on. Now, regional understandings are really important in these large migratory flying insects, because the insects are oftentimes, at least in this case, in the case of many moths, like black cutworm, western bean cutworm, true armyworm, and fall armyworm, these insects are not happening in isolation. They're not showing up. They're primarily not coming from Wisconsin. They're actually flying from much more southern areas, and they're flying north on storm fronts, kind of like the storm we had last night. And these storms are pushing the migration of these insects into our systems. So understanding what's going on across the region gives us a pretty early heads up about what's about to happen. And one of the other really cool things that DATCP puts together, and this is actually all Krista Hamilton's group, is something called the Field Notes newsletter. And you can subscribe to the Field Notes newsletter over here. In fact, we can find this link down here, but if you search DATCP Field Notes, you'll be able to pull this up and click to subscribe. And this newsletter gives a season-long weekly update about what's happening across all different pests in the state. And one of the clever things that they do is they don't stick to one set of insect pests. They actually talk a little bit about what's going on with the crops, what's going on with the weather, what's going on in the system. So for example, I clicked this past week's Field Notes newsletter, and it talked about a little bit about the weather. It talked about planting progress. So it walked through that 75% of the potato planting was complete. I think this is misspelled over here. And then it actually has some information on those flight reports. So when we're looking at, in this case, it was true armyworm. It said this spring moth flights were underway since late March. Trap count rose notably since last week when the network collected 366 flights, averaging 17 moths per trap. And it also recorded another 559 moths recorded this week with a cumulative amount. And it doesn't give this information in isolation. It really nicely contextualizes it. It says some things like, okay, if we're seeing large counts this week, that means in 2 weeks, you should actually go out and start scouting. It's a bit of a long form newsletter, and because it covers all crops in the state, it's not really specific for at least my area of interest, which is field and forage crops within the state of Wisconsin. But what it does do is provide some excellent links to resources, like in this case, a crop and soils extension piece that I was a co-author on true armyworm control. It's basically what happens, how do we find it, how do we scout it, what do we do with it? Now, with this network of traps that Field Notes relies on, this network is actually being run in part in volunteer coordination with UW-Madison Extension. So Josh Camps, and I apologize, Josh, this is the best photo I could find of you on LinkedIn. I think I might need to get a better photo of you here. But Josh Camps actually coordinates some volunteers who run some of these pheromone traps across the state. Josh helps report to DATCP. And I should mention, if you're interested in hosting a trap, folks are always interested, or DATCP folks are always interested in getting additional traps into the system. And all of this data goes really nicely, falls really nicely into that scouting network or that trapping network across the state. Now, one of the things that Josh raised to my group, and Kristen and I have talked about, and we're in the process, this will probably be rolled out for next year, is a trapping optimization question. Now, I'm going to harken back to that first slide. So the title of my position is Precision Pest Ecology for field and forage crops. And what that basically means is, how do we time and space interventions, or how do we time and space different monitoring efforts? So I was given a challenge by Josh that we're hoping will be rolled out into next year's trapping system, where we actually have a list of all of the places that we were collecting insects. I think this was for black cutworm from last year. And what my team is doing is we're taking this list, and this is the map of all the sites that we were collecting insects. We are mapping that onto the density of insects that each of these individual traps collected. We're then overlaying that density of insects onto a geographic map of, in this case, where corn was planted. And we're asking some questions about correlation. So we're asking some questions about where actually these traps line up, and where we think we should have more traps and where we think we should have less traps. So over here, we have a scale of where we think we have some trap missingness. And we actually identified 5 locations and gave that out to Krista's group, where they can put out more traps in arguably a more optimal setting. So we can get more information where we need better information. And that part is all well and good, except we're still missing a critical piece of kind of short form communication. So I was looking around at the states nearby, and it turns out Iowa State University runs this insect pest text alert, or pest alert network, which we decided, okay, let's try that out this year. Where in the same way that Iowa State has put together this network, we've decided to implement this pest alert network with this information coming directly out of that trapping set and that scouting areas from DATCP, from both those pheromone traps. In this case, we have pheromone traps for black cutworm, for western bean cutworm, for true armyworm, and for fall armyworm. We also have some black light traps, which cover some of those lepidopteran or moth pests, as well as paired with some of the DATCP scouting. So folks are going around the state looking for corn earworm, for corn rootworm, for soybean aphids, for alfalfa weevil, for potato leafhopper, and for spider mites. And for each of these pests, as they become a problem in your crop, we are going to be putting together this texting service. And the service basically starts with a sign-up form. And you saw some of I think the link was sent out earlier. I'll put the link back on the screen over here. But the sign-up form has ask your name, your phone number, your email address, and what region you care about. And we'll get into region in about a second from now. It goes through those 10 pests that we talked about before. So it goes through pests that are relevant to corn, soybean, alfalfa, basically all the field and forage crops across the state. So we're talking black cutworm, western bean cutworm, true armyworm, fall armyworm, corn earworm, corn rootworm, soybean aphid, alfalfa weevil, potato leafhopper, and spider mites. And we'll be sending out a weekly text, probably on a Thursday morning. We'll send out the text, and the text will say something like, "Go scout, heads up, this insect, it should be coming on your field," or "Be prepared, this insect's coming in." And it will probably have a link to an alert page, which is a website. And it also might have a photo, depending on if we think the photo's relevant or not for our stakeholders, which are you guys. This will then go to an extension website, which will have the contact information for someone out of my lab if you're interested in more information. It'll have almost an alert page, so a very short form or speed resource that gives a little bit of a bigger summary and more relevant information. This is how you scout, this is what you do. And it'll also link to a deeper resource for each of these pests. The other thing we're doing is we're going to link straight back to that field notes page so that everyone can have access to those longer form resources, especially as the longer form resources might cover pests that this pest alert system does not cover. So when you go to sign up, you can actually sign up directly on my website these days. So bicklab.com/pestalert. You either click here and I'll bring you to this form, or you fill out this form and press subscribe now. And I'll ask you, are you interested in pests in northern Wisconsin, in central Wisconsin, or in southern Wisconsin? And you can actually click more than one of these regions. So let's say you're interested in northern and central Wisconsin. Well, you'll probably get 2 texts a week once the crops are underway during the growing season. If you're interested in all 3, great, we'll send you 3 different alerts. And we'll have a standardized way of letting you know which region we're talking about when we send out those pest alerts. Okay, so I alluded to one really critical resource that we haven't really talked about with this kind of DATCP extension Bick Lab collaboration, and that has to do with insect forecasting. Insects don't grow day by day. They grow through the accumulation of temperature. So basically, as the temperature goes up, insects will actually grow a little bit faster. If you want to slow down an insect's development, you can put it in a refrigerator, and that will actually slow down the insect's development quite a bit. And it'll actually increase the lifespan of the insect. But that growing pattern allows us to do something which allows us to actually model and predict based off of the real temperature in a region, what's going on with the insect pest, what's going on potentially with a disease pest. And there's a group called Vegetable Disease and Insect Forecasting Network. That's essentially our VEG-ENTO modeling network that runs these models in real time about the potential risk of an insect in that moment. Now, this model is based entirely off of historic data. It's not based off of real-time information of, let's say, flights that came early or flights that came late. It's not based off of information like did you actually have insects show up in your specific crop reporting district, or did you not have insects show up in your specific cropping district? It's exclusively based off of prior year's information and on temperature. And sometimes that gives a much better look than scouting or than this trapping network, because it's looking to predict those economically relevant pest stages. But sometimes it misses the mark, right? So between these 2 tools, between this VEG-ENTO model and this trapping network, we should have a pretty good picture of what's going on in our system. And something that we're going to be rolling out in a couple of years from now is actually a combination of those 2, right? Where this trapping network is extremely important because it reports out when the pests actually show up, which these VEG-ENTO models do not do. It reports out, did they show up in your exact region, which the weather type models don't do, or degree day models don't do. So what we're going to do in the Bick Lab, and I've got a master's student by the name of Fletcher Robbins that is working on this one right now. is we're going to take some land use data. So basically, where did folks plant soybeans? Where did folks plant corn? Where did folks plant alfalfa? We're going to take that real-time weather data and these known pest models. And those between these two pieces, the land use weather data, the known pest models, we've now captured exactly what VegEnto is doing. And then we're going to do something that's a little bit unique, and I would argue very, very helpful in the future. We're actually going to combine those two pieces. We're going to take that, the model, the weather, the land use, as well as that network of real pests that are being reported out, of where those pests are found, possibly having, a self-reporting feature here. And we're going to report out essentially a pest weather map, which is an updated version of basically an updatable pest model in the same way that folks do weather. This will likely be hosted, and we've talked with Chris Kucharik, this will likely be hosted on the WiscoNet, our Wisconsin Mesonet, on that webpage. But we're about 2 years out. We basically need to create the model and then test it next year before spinning it out into an actual product for growers. But we're hoping that this is exactly where that insect pest text alert system goes. So in summary, I know you've seen this page a little bit before. Right now, we're taking that DATCP trapping network, we're taking the UW-Madison Extension volunteer coordination role, and we're rolling that together into an insect pest text alert system, which you can sign up on right over here.